let's just start by having you kind of tell us a little bit. Tell us about the survey for the Survey Center on American Life and what you do there, how long you've been there, and what your kind of like mission is at the organization.
Yeah, so I'm a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and the director and founder of the Survey Center on American Life, which is a project of AEI. And I've been doing that for almost exactly 5 years. In fact, we're getting together a little dinner shortly just to sort of look back and celebrate and be astonished that we've been around for 5 years already. The time just flew, but it's been incredible. We've done a lot of different kinds of projects, and one of the things that I really appreciate about doing this kind of work is we get to put our hands in so many different buckets when it comes to the issues and questions that we're investigating, from social capital, religious polarization, political conspiracy theories. We've looked at friendship, romance and relationships. We've done a lot on dating, and so it gives us a really broad look at the sort of the challenges and the issues that Americans are sort of struggling with in their everyday life, and gives us a different picture of the public than we get from a lot of political polls, which I've always thought was like the least kind of interesting polling you could do, right? Because you're asking people all these questions about politics, but we know that Americans, most Americans anyway, are not that interested in following the ups and downs of political debates. And so they tune in occasionally, but then they go back to their lives. And like, that's the kind of work that I've always wanted to do. When they go back to their lives, I want to be asking them the questions, well, how do you spend your time? Who do you spend it with? What kind of institutions are you engaged with? How does that, yeah, how do these experiences make you feel? And
Hmm.
those things to me, there's so much richness there and varied experience that I really appreciate being able to capture.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fascinating. I mean, and I want to. So I was actually going through as I was preparing for this interview. I was going through some of the like your writings on Substack about all these different findings, and I was just so impressed by the breadth and quantity of just different you know topics and subjects that you've dived into over the past 5 years. It was kind of amazing.
Yeah, it's both like a blessing and a curse. The Substack. It's American Storylines. We publish twice a month, and I mean, as someone who writes their own Substack, the kind of impending due date coming up where you've got to publish something because we publish on a regular schedule is like, oh my God, I've got to think of something, and so that's always a
Oh yeah.
challenge. And I enjoy the idea that we can sort of look at a lot of different things. We have lots of different types of data to use for it. And that was the challenging part of the book, is to be so focused on a singular topic and to be diving in so deeply there. I think my natural predilection is to cast my gaze as broadly as possible.
Yeah.
And if one thing doesn't seem that interesting, or I don't have a lot to say in it at a moment, I can switch gears and talk about something else. But so to be narrowly focused, I'm both in awe and applaud people who can do that for their careers and just be singularly focused on an issue or subject area, because that
Yeah.
is not something that comes easily to me.
That was definitely a challenge for me in academia where I was like, I was like 4 or 5 years into like writing a single paper. That was,
Yeah.
eventually going to be like, 10 pages long or something. I was like, oh God, are there better ways that I can be spending my time? But that's not always the case. And I think in academia, especially as you move forward and you get better at the things that you're doing, you can move faster. But there is certainly that intensity of concentration that happens that I find it like now I do enjoy the ability to be a little bit more nomadic with my attention.
And I think too, there's like an iterative quality to all this work, right? So when you think of almost anything in social science, there's like sort of a natural progression that, and this is certainly true in polling, where a finding will lead to more questions than answers, and you're like, well, I did not expect to see that pattern emerge, or we're starting to see a trend develop here. What's going on? And so that builds into the next study that you're doing, so you can look at it from a couple different angles. You can
Yeah.
try to reframe the question, and all these things are really helping you sort of build a more complete picture. And this happened with our research on friendship. So that came out of a 2020 study that we did on social networks. I've been for a long time interested in the way our immediate social context impacts our beliefs and behavior when it comes to politics or religion or basically anything. And so we constructed this what's called an egocentric social network battery, if you're familiar. So that means that we, in a survey, we asked the respondent, give us up to 7 people who are close to you, and by close we define this as someone you've talked to about an important personal matter in like the last 6 months.
Hmm.
And so anyone who fits that description just gives us 7 names, or give us your initials if you don't want to give the name, and then we get a reading on who those people are. So what's the relationship? Age, gender, race, religion, political affiliation. And from that, we can construct an idea of what your social world looks like. So,
Hmm.
who are the people that have a lot of influence over you? What are their political views? What are their religious beliefs? And it's an incredibly powerful tool to understanding the incentives and disincentives to engage in certain types of behavior or beliefs. And I'll just give an example here.
Yeah.
So when you think about religion, if you're a Catholic and you have only other Catholics in your social network that are people who are sort of your inner ring, you're far more likely to have more sort of orthodox beliefs. You're far more likely to attend regularly. You're far more likely to be married to someone who's Catholic.
Hmm.
And so, like, all these things orient you somewhat differently than if you have a network that is religiously really diverse. You're less likely to believe in God and to attend regularly. And so, like, all these things influence the way that we see the world and the way we behave in it.
Yep.
And so that work was supposed to just try to build on our understanding of that. But one question we included in there is just how many people are in this network. And what we found was, when we did this in 2020, it was a replication of something we did in 2013, before I came to AI, and that the number of people who said that they had at least 7 people in their social network had declined, and the number of people who said 0 increased really significantly.
Yep.
So we were really interested, like, wow, what's going on here? It seems like people's social networks are shrinking.
Yeah.
It was in the early days of the pandemic. So we asked questions about, to what extent this is due to, not being able to see people regularly, that thing. And it was only marginally responsible. So we were capturing a larger trend, we thought. And so what we did in the next year is we did a whole survey focused on friendship, and that's where you may have heard the term the friendship recession
Hmm.
that came out of that work.
Mm.
The Saturday Night Live skit Man Park, if you've ever watched it, about men not having enough friends and their girlfriends pushing them into what is ostensibly a dog park where they can talk about
That's
Marvel and
right.
drink IPAs, which is like still a highlight of my career
Oh
to have
my
our research
God.
cited in that piece. So
It's
that built on that,
amazing.
right? So that initial work on that was just trying to examine how social networks influence behavior identified a pattern of declining size of our social networks, and then that from that we were able to sort of build out a whole sort of research portfolio on friendship that no one had really been doing up to that point. There was so
Mm.
little work on it. Like, we were looking at what could we trend back to, and we ended up having to go back to this Gallup survey from 1990, which is the most comprehensive work that had been done on friendship.
Oh
And
my
so we
God.
just updated all those questions, and so that is something that we, has been a big part of our research agenda over the past, like, 5 years.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. I completely forgot. I remember you mentioned that Saturday Night Skit, but I hadn't. But and it's not. It's funny because I don't think that Saturday Night Skit is like at the top of any of your like professional, like
Not on my CV.
that's not on your CV, right? You gotta like do some digging to get that. Well, I'll
Yeah.
make sure to include a link to it on when I put out this podcast so that everyone can check it out. I think it's. I think I
I mean,
remember
I'm
checking
biased,
it
but
out when you
it's
first.
hilarious. I love that.
I know it just sounds so. Yeah, it's so good. Um, so so I have 2 questions. One is, so you also found, right, that there's some like there's major class effects here, right? Like So yeah, can you explain the how this work on friendship interacted with your research on class?
Yeah, this is, I think, one of the more important things that we found. I mean, the friendship stuff was obviously important and is definitely related because we see that the decline in the number of close friends that people have, non-college folks were impacted much more strongly than college grads. So just to give you a couple numbers, I promise not to sprinkle this
Hit
conversation with
us.
too many
Hit us with the data. Hit us. No, that's what
but
we
in
want.
in 1990, in that Gallup poll, 49% of non-college Americans had at least 6 close friends, so roughly half. And then in 2024, when we re-asked that question again, uh, we found that only 17% of non-college Americans had 6 or more close friends. And so that's just an absolute, huge decline in a relationship that like a lot of the social science research says is are incredibly important, right? That we know that as hard as it is to measure like what it is to be a good friend and what friendship means, we know that having a number of close personal connections really matters for our personal health, emotional health, all sorts of personal welfare outcomes are much better if we have a larger group. And we've seen this in our own work that if you have more close friends, it matters, right? So it's not just having someone you can really trust, like having one or two people. It's having a larger network of people where you really sort of see more significant positive outcomes. And so the fact that non-college Americans were suffering more severely here was really important. And you see this across a whole bunch of different measures, and something that I call civic separation, right? Where you have over the last 30 years, it's not just economic outcomes that are had shifted between college and non-college folks. It's social outcomes as well. And I think this does not get nearly the attention it deserves when we talk about the benefits of a college education. Uh, in exclusively economic terms, we're missing all the positive social outcomes that come about from it.
Yeah.
Talk about the economic productivity and the boon that AI will be. Well, we don't talk about social productivity, and that's equally important when you sort of think about our welfare and our well-being. And across all these different dimensions, you see non-college folks just faring worse. The decline in participation in religious services and religious membership. It's much steeper among non-college folks than college grads. We've asked questions about just the informal kinds of participatory activities. So, are you a member of a rec sports team or a book club, or any kind of sort of civic organization? And college grads are much higher across the board. And it's not just commercial spaces that we find there's a difference. It's public places too. So the places that you think that would be less susceptible to having a difference in class, right? So it may be that non-college folks can't afford to hit up the coffee shop or go to a bar or restaurant as regularly as college grads. But you see in use of public libraries and community centers and public parks that college grads are using those places more often as well. And so like we see the story emerging of not just economic hardship that non-college folks are experiencing, but social hardship as well. And that's when I think like when you see economic indicators showing progress or sort of saying, hey, actually non-college folks are doing much better. We're seeing wage growth increase. I don't think we're seeing the same kind of growth in their social networks and their ability to socialize. And so I think we're tracking one part of the story and completely ignoring the other part.
Yeah, yeah, that's fascinating. Do you now? So I think a logical or sort of like um immediate next question is like to what do we attribute this to? I know that there's Robert Putnam and some of the sociologists, writing in, Bowling Alone and that whole sort of like genre of work, we're documenting the decline in the participation in civic engagement and lack of church attendance and declining union membership and things like that in the second half of the 20th century. It seems like that is, if anything, has gotten worse across the board, and particularly among people, non-college educated folks. Um, do you have any in your research? Do you posit any particular? I mean, obviously, the pandemic was a major contributor here. Are there other forces that you think consider to be at play that are particularly responsible for this class difference and for the effects across the board?
Yeah, I think if you look at the institutions that played a really significant role in structuring the social relationships of Americans without college degrees, there's three that I think loom pretty large: veterans groups, union halls, and churches and places of worship. And across the board, the membership in those organizations have collapsed. There are, fewer Americans serving in the military, so there are fewer veterans. So you're seeing a decline in membership in veterans groups. You're seeing a long tail decline in union membership, and I think one of the things that happens when we think about like the benefits of unions, we focus on sort of the economic outcomes, but they were really important in providing solidarity for workers as well, and sponsoring social activities and bringing families together. And so they really were an important social hub as well. And of course, churches and places of worship are incredibly important to provide community cohesiveness, a sense of belonging, bringing people together in ways that I think few institutions can and have replicated. And so you have sort of all these three things: membership declining across the board, and where you have college grads sort of picking up the slack through efforts to sort of build out their own sort of membership groups. I said, book clubs and other kinds of activity groups, like membership in places like Orange Theory and workout groups and running clubs, right? Like you see a lot of college grads engage in these kinds of activities to
My wife will be
displace.
happy about that one. She's a
Yeah,
she's a
right.
she's a major Orange Theory fan. So
Or
shout out to
yoga,
Vani.
right? Like there's a social component to these activities that they're doing, and it takes a significant amount of resources to do it and time to do it. Uh, but if you have a college degree, you're more likely to have those kind of resources available to you. And if you're, don't you, then you suffer the social consequences. And the other piece of this too is the workplace. So when we asked a survey a little while ago, where did you meet some of your close friends? And it could be the neighborhood or a church or, high school or college or at your workplace. And the top two for college grads was um, college, not surprisingly. And then the second was workplace. And this makes a
Mm,
lot of sense, right? That if you are, especially before the pandemic, when we were all going to the office 9 to 5, 5 days a week, you're seeing these people regularly. There's sort of built-in social opportunities. A lot of workplaces, you would see people going out for happy hours after work. You'd see them and socializing, maybe and building friendships through their workplace. And organizations that cultivated that kind of social environment tended to benefit from it, so that they would have better worker retention, better worker productivity when people were building friendships through their coworkers. And so that was a
mhm,
really important place where people built that kind of social connection. And I think what's happened is actually we've probably put too much focus on the workplace as a place for us to connect socially. And so what happens with retirees is that they lose their entire social world, right? Or a big chunk of it when they retire, that so much of their social connection and their ability to socialize with people comes through their workplace. And so when that disappears, that there's no real replacement for it. And I think also when people lose their job, they're fired or let go, that's another reason why that is so difficult. Not only do you have the economic stress of losing a job, but you are now separated socially from your sort of close colleagues as well.
mm,
And one of the things that's been problematic, I think, for non-college folks is that the rise of gig work and the sort of move towards service industry work means that they have many more irregular hours. And so you may be doing shift work. If you're working at a bar or a restaurant, you may not have the same schedule week to week. You may not know your schedule ahead of time. If you're doing gig work, you may be working on your own for long hours. And so it's far more difficult to develop a strong, cohesive social network through your workplace because people are leaving, people are coming, you have irregular schedules, so you're seeing different people week in, week out, or you may not see anyone other than the customers you're serving. And so I think that creates real challenges for how do you develop really strong social ties through this all the time you're spending right at the workplace. We know that the majority, for most of us, majority of our waking hours are spent working, at least
Mhm.
Monday through Friday. And so that
Mhm.
creates some real challenges for non-college folks that, again, we haven't really identified. And then if you think about the pandemic too, uh, I think that's impacted all of us in ways that we haven't, I think, fully reckoned with yet.
Mhm. Yeah, that's so. Yeah, the image that I have in my mind is that you have this sort of like retreat of some traditional forms of socializing, i.e., like clubs and religious attendance and things like that. Then you have these sorts of like white collar jobs that are kind of coming in to fill the gap. And then you have like social hours and you have kombucha in the hallway and you
Right.
have like, and so they, in fact, actually it's a hallmark of the sort of like startup tech culture that it becomes that there's a ping pong table and like there's, and so, and there's the WeWork, right? And like you're meeting and encountering people in the halls that way. Um, and that social fulfilling that social need has become an indicator that that a company is sort of like has a certain social status and that like it affords people a certain kind of lifestyle that is inherently social and it promises that social connection as part of the experience of working there. Whereas I could imagine that in more blue collar uh, jobs like that, just first of all, the resources just aren't there to have a ping pong table in the hallway, and also maybe it becomes it's just less of an maybe there's less of an emphasis on that social aspect
Right. It's less part of the
in
culture.
those contexts. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, like for all this stuff, there's like a broader conversation that my colleague Yuval Levin, he talks about the decline of institutions and how critical these are. And I think when institutions are working well, they tend to be invisible. They're structuring our time, they're structuring who we spend it with. And
Mhm.
in many ways, this is good, right? We need sort of to trust each other to build social solidarity. We need some sort of umbrella to operate under that, which provides shared norms and values. And so we can build up some kind of expectation of like reciprocity. So like if I do this, you're going to do this, and if one of us violates a norm, there's going to be some repercussions. And so that's why the internet has been an absolute shit show when it comes to dating or other kinds of social interactions because it's removed all that, right? So if I'm engaging with you in a workplace, we kind of know what the norms and we've been socialized to understand like the ways of behaving, ways of dressing, the ways we may relate to one another.
Mhm.
Certainly we know things that we probably shouldn't talk about in a workplace setting. And so online there are sort of none of those guardrails. And I've heard again and again from folks that I've talked to, particularly young people, is that absent those shared norms, you can kind of do whatever you can get away with. And you do have to worry about whether, there's going to be some swarm of people coming to come after you if you say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. That certainly happens, but by and large, right? We can only focus on so many different things at one time. So a lot of people, and particularly in certain areas of the internet, you can sort of say really crazy stuff.
Hmm.
And I think that part of the problem is we don't have online institutions that can provide the same kind of thing that we get from our offline institutions. And this is at a time when interpersonal and social trust is really, really low. Partly, I think, brought about by the fact that fewer of us are members of shared workplaces or other kinds of institutions where we can sort of help build that and establish a sense of trust and reciprocity.
Yeah. And in a sense, the internet has kind of swept in to replace certain aspects of the social isolation. It gives the appearance of connection without the actual substance of it. You can feel as though you have lots of friends and you have, oh, I have, so many Instagram followers and things like that. But
Right.
there's inevitably going to be something that's like deeply missing about those types of connections versus the ones that you actually have in person. Um, yeah.
Exactly.
So so talk to me a little bit about Gen Z. Do you feel like I know you've done some work on the ways in which the younger generation, some of the different kind of approaches to values and living that they have relative to other generations, and also even relative to um, other previous younger generations, like when millennials were the same age as Gen Z are now. So I just wonder if there were some sort of, if you could outline some of the findings that you got through that work, and if there were things that stood out to you that you think are particularly revealing about this generation.
Well, I think as it relates to the conversation on institutions, I think one of the big dividing lines between Gen Z and millennials is that technology has afforded them the opportunity to connect instantly with all these different people in all these different contexts. And like you didn't form your first sense of who you are and where you fit in through your interaction with your local community, right? In your neighborhood, uh, at your school, right? Like that's how you really get a sense of yourself and your place in the world was in the real world, right? And now you have young people trying to sort that out when they're being bombarded with all these different signals and influences, and they can go any kind of corner of the internet and find people or places where their views can be validated no matter what they are. I think that's really, really difficult and really, really challenging as a young person. Like one of the hardest things we have to do is get a sense of who we are and what we like and what we don't like and the kind of person we want to be. And if you're sort of flooded with all this information and ideas and different lifestyles, it becomes really, really difficult. And one of the things that I think that Gen Z parents, one mistake that they made is that there's been this sort of cultural push and parental push, I think, to say that, hey, you can be anything you want, right? You can do anything. You can do any kind of work that you want. And I think what we need is actually less focus on freedom and autonomy and more like, no, no, actually, there's a model here that works really, really well. And it has to do with focusing on relationships, thinking about marriage, thinking about parenthood. If that's a goal, then you should actually be talking about it. And what we found in some of our surveys is parents will focus a lot and talk to their kids a lot about financial security and getting a good job and having a good career, and they won't talk about the relational components. So they won't talk about, hey, it's actually really important to find a person that you respect and that respects you, and to think about the meaningfulness of having kids. And so we did focus groups in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we asked just a show of hands how many people had heard these messages about marriage and parenthood from their parents, who presumably, right, thought that it was a pretty good deal or that they had kids themselves. And no one raised their hands across four different groups, people aged 25 to in their, I think, the early 30s. And then we asked how many had heard about, financial security and independence and getting a good career, and everyone raised their hands. Everyone has heard those messages, and so
Mhm.
we've again focused on economic security and financial security, seemingly at the expense of the sort of social component. And so I
Mhm.
think that's sort of a broader shift. And we know that this generation, again, is less likely to be raised in churches and places of worship. They're less likely to participate in clubs. We're seeing membership in for boys, especially rec sports is declining. and they are spending a lot more time online, which again, like, offers you sort of boundless ideas about what kind of person you can be, and what you can do. When really, I think we need to sort of say, well, there's a lot of different paths you can take, but here are some good ones.
That's interesting. So I hear my my progressive friends when you at the mention of, the focus on marriage and
Yeah.
and raising a family, being like, well, that cuts against, 50 years of liberation, the feminist movement and the sort of a pushing back against some of the ways in which those sorts of structures and institutions can be coercive and can be detrimental to people's autonomy and their ability to authentically figure out who they are and the kind of person they want to be. And so I wonder how you make sense of this, because I can see sort of forces in both directions, and I wonder how you kind of reconcile how do you create a world that kind of is able to move past some of the ways in which those instructions and expectations have been coercive to people and have caused people to feel as though they need to fit a particular mold, while at the same time, agn- you know, maintaining and acknowledging some of the values that and some of the ways, as a parent myself, like I do feel like, it has opened up new opportunities to experience meaning and selflessness that I don't think that I was fully aware of before. And so there are really amazing doors that opens, and I just wonder how you can kind of think about balancing those two value systems.
I think it is a balance. Uh, and if you think about, the sort of a pendulum, right, that we're moving between, more autonomy, and it's sort of more structure and support for sort of traditional ideas and institutions. Like, there's definitely I think a movement much more towards freedom recently. Not that they're, I can hear, I have plenty of progressive friends. I can hear them talking to me about, the decline, like the Roe v. Wade being overturned, right, and the fact that there's still a lot of ways in which people of color, women, don't have the same opportunities as men and white people. So, like, there's this is not to say anything about um uh that we don't need, or we want to return to the 1950s. And I think it is about thinking about social obligation. And honestly, I'm informed by your work, right?
Mm.
That one of the things that big study that you did on Reddit, am I the asshole, was about, like, what do we feel like we owe each other? And right now, I think we've moved so far to thinking that we don't really need to be available for anything or have any kind of social obligation for each other, that any kind of thing, anytime it becomes an imposition, that we can cut and run. Like, some of my book treads on this territory. When we think about what we owe people in our lives, and the rise in people going no contact, so young people breaking off relationships with their parents, people, there's a rise in number of people getting prenups before getting married. There's people wanting to make sure that it's as easy as possible to extricate themselves from a failed relationship. People ghosting each other when they're in relationships. And so, like, I think that this idea that it should be just easy as possible to separate ourselves from each other is kind of a problem. And not to say that you should be, inexorably tied to someone that you don't want to be. But I think, like, by making it so easy, by making sure that we can be by ourselves, we end up being able to do that. We are spending way more time by ourselves than previous generations. And so I think, like, that to me is. Do we have a feedback?
Oh, maybe. I'm having an issue with my microphone or my earphones. Give me 1 second.
Yeah.
How's that? Is that better?
Yeah, I think that's better.
I think my
Uh,
earphones cut out. Go ahead.
yeah, so I think like where I come down is like, yeah, absolutely, no one should be coerced or have decisions made for them when it comes to these really really critical life choices that they have to make when it regards to a partner or having kids.
Yeah.
But I think so many of us, when it comes into institutions, want to operate in such a way that our preferences supersede everything else, right? Like our needs supersede everything else. So you have people going into marriages thinking of like, well, how is this benefiting me directly? Not what can I build together with this person, um, and what will I have to sacrifice, but how is it serving my immediate needs? And the same thing you see with religious organizations, where young people are now saying most young people say that religious institutions should adopt more modern practices as opposed to maintaining their sort of traditional approaches to their beliefs and practices. And so I think it's happening across these different institutions. You see it certainly in family and religion. I think it's the same is true in the workplace when young people are coming in and wanting pretty substantial cultural changes over a relatively short period of time. And I think it's fine to, if you're part or a member of an institution, to sort of say, I think this would work better if we adopted this new approach or this new take. But I think that the expectation is that institutions should be formative. They should also change you. And I think there's an unwillingness to be formed by institutions now. We're saying, no, no, no. I want the
Mm-hmm.
benefits of membership, but I don't want to do some of the work.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm speaking in generalities here, and I'm sure plenty of people will object to some of the way I'm characterizing this, but I think you just see it again and again and again, especially on the internet. There was this recent analysis that someone did of Reddit relationship advice. And over a 15-year period, they found that the number of suggestions for ending a relationship increased dramatically.
Oh, I've been wondering about that because there's so much there's all this stuff like, oh, you should break up, you got,
Yeah.
like, oh, end it, or even like, don't talk to your parents anymore, or don't talk to your kids anymore. There's just a lot of advice about just people being like, end the relationship completely. What is it? No contact. Like,
Yeah,
uh,
I have a new article for my Substack coming out on the issue of divorce. We asked the question among people who were married, have you ever thought about getting a divorce? And it was something like 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 uh, people who were married said that they had ever thought about it. And so we called them up. We called up a handful of them and just talked to them about like
wow.
what was going on. And the thing we heard again and again was that the people who ended up staying married were those that had a social support system that encouraged them to work through problems
Mm.
and not to leave and sort of say, hey, we know that this is hard. We know that you guys are having problems, but we sort of believe in you. We believe you guys can work it out. And the people that receiving those kind of messages and receiving the kind of support ended up sort of saying, yeah, I really appreciated having my parents or having my friends provide that kind of feedback. And we know that
That's
from previous
so
social
interesting.
science research that divorce is contagious, right? That when you have someone in your network that gets divorced, and it could be a friend or even a friend of a friend, your likelihood of getting divorced increases. And in our research, we found that married couples with divorced friends have lower levels of marital satisfaction, right? We can't tease out causality there, but it's a really strong correlation. And so I do think paying attention, coming full circle here, paying attention to your social network and who's in it matters a whole heck of a lot.
Yeah. I have I have conflicted feelings about divorce because part of me feels like, like I have always had friends. I've had a lot of friends who are in situations where like, oh man, I've been with this person for many years. Like, should we break up? And on one level, you're like, oh, you should stick it out. On the other level, I kind of feel like if you're really thinking about breaking up with someone, then you kind of probably should break up with them because because
Yeah.
it's so much harder to break up than it is to stay together. The momentum is like for staying together is actually way stronger than the momentum for breaking up, and there's a huge hurdle to breaking up. And so like it's now with it when it comes to divorce and things like that, I mean like it's maybe a little bit different because there can be kids involved, and so there are probably reasons outside of yourself to stay together. But I'm not totally I think that sometimes people see divorce as an indicator of some of like as a necessary like it the fact that that someone got divorced means that something bad happened, but actually maybe something really good happened, which is that like people who weren't supposed to be together are no longer together, and maybe they're a lot happier doing their own thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to marriage and divorce, right? Like it's such a personal thing, and we don't you never know the intimate sides of someone's relationship, and it we can sort of put aside, yeah, if there's abuse or mistreatment, like absolutely you should get out, you should get help, and not stay with someone who's mistreating you, right? Like
Mhm.
that's clear. We should make that as easy as possible. We should provide as much resources and help for people in those really scary situations. But for most of what um, we're seeing, particularly among younger people getting divorced now, and I've talked to a divorce lawyer, and I've seen them sort of quoted in the New York Times and other places as sort of saying, "Hey, it's less about like cheating, infidelity, and that kind of thing, and more
Mm,
about people just saying I'm unhappy with my
mm,
partner or I'm
mhm,
unhappy in my relationship." Is a much more common experience now, and I worry a little bit that if you look at so much of the content on social media that people are consuming, it's negative. It's either, okay, look at all these terrible things that my partner or spouse is doing, or on the other side, it's like, look how perfect my partner is. Like he does all these thoughtful things. Or, hey, I no longer have a partner or spouse, and look at all these amazing adventures I'm having with my friends and such a good time. There's not a lot of like sort of
mm.
normie, hey, I'm married and I love
Yeah,
my spouse, and it's hard sometimes, and we argue occasionally, and it's a lot of work, but it's really worth it. But like there's just there's a complete absence of that kind of content for
is
understanding
marriage
this.
is marriage like getting subjected to like the Yelp effect where you basically just have this bimodal distribution where like if you go online it's either just 1 star or 5 stars, and there's no
Right.
like 3 stars, there's no
I'm not part of
3 star
that business.
marriage
No.
review
No, you're either
on
you're
Reddit.
married to sort of a perfect angel of a partner, or yeah, or a demon, and like there's nothing in between.
Yeah, no one's going on Reddit being like, yeah, things are okay. Yesterday was not as good, but today's a little bit better.
Things are
Yeah.
pretty good. We had a good talk last night. We talked some
Yeah,
things out. We
exactly.
worked through our
It's
logistics that we needed to work through, and yeah,
right, right. Oh, my husband got me a sports car for my birthday, or,
right,
my husband cheats on me. Those are basically the 2 stories you get.
yeah.
Well, man, we have so much more to talk about because we haven't even gotten into all of your stuff on gender and all that. But I don't
Round
want to
two.
take any more of your time. We'll have to do it again. All right, closing thought. I'm having these conversations, thinking about sort of the state of of American society right now and where we go from here. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts or ideas about other people that would be helpful or interesting to speak to.
So, yes, and this is someone you know well. So my new colleague Daniel Stid,
Yeah,
he's written one of the best things I've read on a Substack, when he wrote this long story, essay about his father
yeah,
and the social capital that he built through sort of years of just being there for neighbors, and what that meant, and I would read an entire book on that. Like I told Daniel, like, this was amazing, and there's so much sort of richness in his experience, and I think there's so many lessons to be learned about, just again, sense of mutual obligation to each other,
yeah,
and doing the work for each other that can help us sort of societally move ahead, because I think so much of what's going on now with our politics is sort of the breakdown of the sense of social obligation to each other. And we
Mm.
used to have it, right? And there used to be institutions that would help encourage it, but now I think that it's really, really rare that we sort of can come together and work together and feel that we are there for each other.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I absolutely adore Daniel Stitt, and I definitely have to have him on the podcast. So this is just reaffirming that, and I absolutely agree in terms of just the way that you're framing the problem. This is sort of the direction that, as you know, we're kind of going with the Beacon Project, which is just, how do we restore this national narrative of mutual obligation? What do we owe each other, and how do we balance um, the value of freedom and autonomy with a sense of obligation and responsibility to ourselves and to the people around us.
So
Um,
Eric Liu, who you just had on
yeah,
in a meeting, and I don't think he'll be upset that I mentioned this, but
yeah,
he had this idea, and I don't know what would go in it, but he talked about a together agenda,
mm,
which I really, really like this
uh,
idea, that, so many of us are wanting to go our own ways, and believing that, we'll be happier on our own, and technology is availing us opportunities to do things on our own. We don't need the ride to the airport. We don't need help mounting the TV. We can get TaskRabbit. We can get a Lyft. We now can talk to AI instead of talking to our friends. And so I think, conceptualizing an agenda that not only encourages us but requires us to come
mm,
together and be together is incredibly powerful to me. Again, I don't know what
yeah.
we would put in it. Maybe he has some ideas, but like that to me is something that I would get excited about.
Yeah, yeah, love that. Well, he didn't tell that to me on the podcast, so and I'll have to have him on too. Again. Um,
Just a conveyor belt of,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. We'll just go back and forth between you and Eric,
That's
and
right.
maybe throw Daniel Stitt in the mix too. Listen, Dan, I really, really appreciate you coming and spending the time with me, and yeah, look forward to chatting again soon.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me.